Welcome to The Screen Queen, where I'll be talking about your favorite movie or your favorite TV show. You'll just have to listen to find out. Here is your host, Samantha Parrish. Hello there, and welcome back to the show. As always, my name is Samantha Parrish, and you are listening to the host on the East Coast, The Screen Queen. So, I'm just gonna have to say it. Where would we be without Roseanne? Now, I know a lot of people can't ignore the controversies, but I feel the controversies have overshadowed the legacy that the show has. And I also got the chance to talk to somebody who feels the same way I do, and that is the best friend of my best friend named Blair. And Blair had offered a lot of really good commentary about the show of Roseanne that really helped me write this episode. So, right off the bat, I need to give a shout out to the woman that really helped out this episode. Thank you so much, Blair. Blair and I talked about the whole history of Roseanne, and it was very lovely to talk about this with someone that sees Roseanne the same way I do. A majority of people that I've talked to about Roseanne have usually spoke negatively about it, and I've never been one to dismiss how someone feels about a show, but this was usually the response I got. I really got my eyes open to get a refresher on how much Roseanne is an iconic show. The controversies obscure it, but really, Roseanne doesn't get a lot of credit for how it is a milestone in how far we've come for television. And unfortunately, the controversies have shrouded that, and that's what I'm here for today, to kind of offer a glimpse beyond the controversies. There's a lot to talk about this very controversial sitcom queen. So, my ladies and gentlemen and my non-binary babes, grab your chicken shirts, get your beer, and get your harmonica out, because this is Roseanne. So I feel my audience is pretty knowledgeable of the plot of Roseanne. I mean, it's just a hardworking blue-collar mother raising her 3 kids, and she's got a scamper of a husband named Dan Connor, and you just see her go through life. Like a majority of certain shows that gave us a glimpse into the blue-collar life, but this also felt more than just getting a glimpse into the blue-collar life. This was covered with a lot of commentary itself, with how it dealt with family trauma, sexuality, and other things. So I want to take the time, before I get into those hard-hitting topics, to discuss Roseanne herself. But I'm not talking about Roseanne Barr, I'm talking about Roseanne Connor. There's a reason why Roseanne Connor sticks out, and it's kind of not hard to see why. She's a good mom! I feel that the more controversies that's happened over Roseanne Barr, the more the plot of the show gets obscured. Like, not many people talk about the character of Roseanne. It's just, oh, she's loud. Like, yeah, but she's loud and a good mom. But there is an episode that I want to point out that really encapsulates how good of a mom Roseanne Connor is. It's in season 1 called A Mall Story, where Becky wants this beautiful dress to wear for a school event. And Roseanne is like there for any decision that Becky makes. But when they find out that the dress is $80, Roseanne has to tell her what's going on. Roseanne could have just said, no, we're not buying it, not explain, but she did take the time to explain a little bit more about what's going on, to let her kids know, to not keep her kids in the dark, but that it means whatever is happening with the finances is going to impede things like buying an $80 dress. Becky does not want to understand, and that is understandably so. She's 14 and she's crushed that she can't get this dress. Roseanne feels crushed for her and is still trying to calmly explain what's going on, but Becky is not having it and she storms out the store, feeling that she can't get anything that she wants as hard as she works. And Roseanne lets her stew for a little bit and then finally gets an opportunity to talk to Becky and let Becky know that as much as she wants to get the dress for her, it's just not possible. But she also mentioned to Becky, too, about how embarrassed she felt that there was a scene caused in the store. Roseanne did this all without yelling. And she did this all without making Becky feel bad at all. Everything about how Roseanne handled that whole situation is the pinnacle of how you want a mother to be written in a TV show. Someone that will not keep their children in the dark, but have a way to explain it to them that they understand. And that at the end of the day, no matter what happens, there is a way to get through it. Roseanne didn't just bullshit her way through anything. She didn't give lies to her children. Well, mostly. We know Roseanne has made some white lies. She kind of has to. I feel like my mom has had to do the same thing with me too. Roseanne made a lot of moms relatable. I feel a lot of my mom resembles Roseanne, not only because of humor, but in parenting tactics as well. Since I also had to be informed about the way life works from my mom, because she didn't want to keep me in the dark, that I needed to understand what was going on in case there were things that came up that we couldn't do, so I would know what's happening. Roseanne carried this to all of her children. She wanted them to be the best, but the one thing above them all is that she wanted them to try. Usually with some parents, unfortunately, it's like one extreme or another. They either don't support you or they expect you to be a doctor by the time you're 12. And with Roseanne, she wanted them to have good lives, but she wanted them to just be okay with themselves. She wanted their mental health to be okay. For a majority of the episodes that I watched, it's very evident these kids have no trauma because of the way that she talked to them. Roseanne handled things the way that a mom would, to give comfort, give a reality check, and then give support, all within this very witty banter that her kids were able to learn because of her. The thing about a parent is that, you're leading a child into the world, and everything that they're told needs to be understood. And damn it, like Roseanne said things that definitely parallel things that my mom told me to help me go on with my life and help me understand life, that there were some things I needed to know about so I could survive in the world. Roseanne prepared everyone for the raw reality of what was going to happen. She was already in a standpoint in the late 80s where money's not the best, but things were going to get better, but she had to continually make it that there was a future for her children in more ways than just financial. So for a show that's whole identity is money isn't everything, well, until season 9. But the thing about how she was providing a future for her children, she didn't just let them go on their way, that if they did stumble, they could always come back home. It wasn't going to be, all right, you learn, good luck. She didn't do that. She still wanted them to be on their way, but the door was still always open. Roseanne gave that to her kids, and we got to see that in every episode. None of the beginning episodes felt as cookie cutter as something like Full House, where you had a very cheesy lesson that was just words and not learned. The kids in Roseanne earned and learned their lessons on how to navigate through life. As the way the show progresses, the kids turned out pretty damn good, and that's because of Roseanne. Except for the fourth child, who, nothing happened to him, unfortunately. But as much as I love Roseanne Connor for being the dysfunctional domestic goddess that she is, I also like how her marriage to Dan spoke on a lot of volumes about the reality of relationships. And I have to say this, and I'm not trying to blow smoke up this show's ass, but this is my favorite TV couples of all time. So I'm going to reference the chat that I had with my friend Blair, and this is going to be leading into one of the points that I really want to tackle, and that is why Dan and Roseanne felt like one of the most beloved sitcom couples. The one thing that I love about their relationship that Blair pointed out was they had the same dreams, because if that was Dan's dream, then it became Roseanne's dream, and Roseanne's dream became Dan's dream. And season 5, when Roseanne wanted to go into business with her sister Jackie, Dan was on board immediately. There was no holding back. And even though he does not think the world of Jackie, he still wanted to support Jackie. Like, he was committed himself 100% to that project. But also, Dan wasn't a dumbass. Dan is by all means every flavor of comedic thanks to the comedy talents of John Goodman, but Dan knew exactly what he was doing. He was a very smart man. He knew how to tackle all these issues because he knew how to be a good listener. And Dan did not have a good upbringing, just like how Roseanne also had a bit of a hard upbringing as well. They were able to not let their family trauma get to them so they could be able to be the family that they wish they had growing up. That's the kind of family that everyone wants. It's the very millennial thing to hear these days about how someone didn't have that kind of family growing up, so you became what you couldn't have. Dan and Roseanne had that. But another thing that is a Blair note that was mentioned is Dan and Roseanne let their children fail. That hit me hard when she said that. Dan and Roseanne let their children make mistakes, but they were there to catch their children when they fell. And oh boy, did Darlene, Becky, and DJ have some great falls. Between Becky quitting school, Darlene quitting school, quitting relationships, going back to school, getting pregnant. And I love the one line Roseanne says to Darlene where she says, if you quit, at least you quit college and you quit before you began it. Like, she always wanted her kids to do better than she did. Dan and Roseanne both became those kind of parents that they still wanted their children to at least try. That they didn't want them to give up. They still wanted their kids to just try, to become independent and at least try. And if it doesn't work out, then they can come back home, get on the couch, get the nice Afghan around their shoulders that's been on that couch for 30 fucking years, cry about it, and then find another solution. They always worked with their children. They were there for every era of their children, no matter what they went through between relationships, jobs, boyfriends, anything. They were there. I love how they never just gave things to the kids. The kids had to earn it, but even as the kids were earning it, Dan and Roseanne helped them along the way as they earned it. They weren't just gonna throw their kids to the wolves. In a way, Dan and Roseanne broke a lot of TV taboos that you didn't really have a couple like Dan and Roseanne that looked heavier or just wore jeans and t-shirts. They were very casual, and that was very comforting about their dynamic was how comfortable you could see they are with each other. They were not going to uphold the traditional American houseworking stuff because they're too fucking busy to uphold a lot of stuff because there's rent to be paid. Everything is unclean, and that's wonderful. I love how they were a couple that were okay with a little bit of a mess because it was their home. They need this to be a comforting place. They didn't let things in their home get to them, and it was very refreshing. There was an episode in season 1 that really encapsulates on that note called Working Overtime, where Roseanne has to work overtime, unfortunately, so that means dinner's not going to be on the table. But like I said, Dan is the greatest American dad, so he's like, hey, we will work around this overtime the best we can. Dan comes to the plate tenfold. After Roseanne has a hard day of overtime, she comes home and none of the rules are being followed. Everything's in disarray, and Dan goes, hey, get out of the house for a little while. I will take care of everything. And Roseanne gets the time she needs out of the house. It's clean. It's not the cleanest, but it's just enough to get to tomorrow. But as much as Roseanne depicted great relationships, it was also honest about all relationships. So for this example, I want to talk about the character Becky, because when I went back to look at Roseanne, she was the one that I focused on the most in terms of the commentary that sort of spoke through her being a girl that got married very young. So Becky has had relationships. She was on the up and up, going through life, and then Mark came in, who was drastically different than her other relationships. When you look at all the seasons, Mark came in at season 3, so we've only seen 2 seasons of Becky just kind of going through her life, and then she got hit with a whirlwind romance. That, oh boy, Me and my millennials will know that as trying to fix the bad boy. And oh boy, was Mark the example of that. So, yes, even though throughout the entirety of the show, we know Mark does love Becky. But Mark loves Becky because Becky loves Mark. It's that admiration that this is a girl that took a chance on him and still took chances on him even when he messed up. And Mark wasn't abusive, but he also wasn't mature. Both of them were not ready for marriage as much as they loved each other. Some marriages in a whirlwind do work. Becky and Mark, as much as it was depicted that they were still together, from what we know now, you're not supposed to stay with someone that is not going to help you reach your goals. And unfortunately, Mark didn't do that. Becky was on the up and up to getting into college. Like at the very end of season 4, she was looking into colleges, but then when that didn't work out, she decided, fuck with it. I'm just gonna marry Mark because I don't want to lose him because he's gonna go for a job. It's like, shit, no, you stay, you go to college. Because that was what Becky was all about. And Mark just stopped that whole dream. I wouldn't say he took it away from her. She could have left at any time, but this was Becky's choice. Everything is on Becky. As much as there are some people we want to help, they have to help themselves. And unfortunately, Becky couldn't stop helping Mark long enough to help herself. Unfortunately, Becky's story is just one of thousands of girls that get married too young and they should have divorced, but they didn't divorce. So you just kind of know the future of what's going to happen. But in the case of Becky, her future is a little bit more tragic in her relationship. Now, on a side note, the actor that played Mark died from alcoholism in the early 2000s, so they did not write another person to take the role of Mark because of the honor shown towards the actor and how much they really liked him. However, they didn't let that get in the way of how they needed Becky's story to go. That everything had to be brought to the table, that when it comes down to it, Becky ruined her life the moment she married Mark. And in a way, the Connors kind of corrected how that marriage wasn't good. Now, with that said, Roseanne never said this was a good thing to stand by your man. The emotion still felt validated for the concern that Dan and Roseanne had for Becky and her choice to get married. And the Connors, they really encapsulated on that. Now, with that said, I have to say that I did not get into the Connors. After the whole controversy of Roseanne went through, I was like, that's it. My time is done. Closing that chapter. But this clip came up, and I'm honestly glad that I saw it. So I found out that the revival of Roseanne had to do with Becky becoming an alcoholic after Mark died, which, honestly makes sense. And unfortunately, this is now the final nail in how the family cannot tolerate what's going on anymore. Like, they can't hold her hand. It goes back to my previous point that Dan and Roseanne let their kids fail. Like, they stood by this marriage that they didn't provide because they wanted everything for Becky. But then when it got to rehab, that was it. They had to rip the Band-Aid off. And of course, with this being Dan at the front, this really hit on a lot of volumes because Dan was affected the most by this relationship. And Dan says the words, "You should have never married Mark." And that hit hard because I'm like, he's right. She shouldn't have married Mark. Becky's whole life fell apart. She gave everything to a man that didn't provide the same dreams as Dan provided dreams for Roseanne and vice versa. Becky was woken up to realizing what had happened, that she is mourning for a man that has essentially taken her life away. Never abused her, but she did not get everything in life that she could have had. Becky comes to the realization and she said, "I could have been a doctor, Dad. I could have made you proud." And he says, "You do make me proud." But he had to just make her wake up, because if she doesn't, then he probably could have lost his daughter that day if she didn't didn't wake up to realize that Mark was the source of not only of her drinking, but the source of her unhappiness. It's a very sad blue-collar tragedy, to really call it like that. I mean, Becky's story from the beginning in the 80s all the way to the revival, it really encapsulates on how someone has gone through what Becky went through. Just like with the relationships, there are many great takeaways from this show that doesn't get enough credit, that Roseanne was one of the first trailblazers. It wasn't just one of the very first unique sitcoms, but this show had the strength to do what no other shows could at the time. Like, not many people put this together, but Roseanne is the reason why we have Halloween on television. Now, we've had Halloween specials, but there was a limitation on what you could do on Halloween. A lot of networks were like, there's a line between being spooky and then being John Carpenter's Halloween. And we can't go to that area. But Roseanne was like, but what if you could in a funny way? And so she tested the network. And she said, we're going to do a Halloween episode. And if you don't like it, then we won't do another one. Now, I say this because this officially predates when The Simpsons started doing the Treehouse of Horror. That impact, blew my mind. And now Roseanne has started Halloween for many networks, and that carried on to The Simpsons, and it carried on to other ones. And to think, we wouldn't have it if it wasn't for the nasally voiced sitcom mom of the late 80s. Now, the other thing that Roseanne did that I wouldn't say was the first, but I would say it followed the coattails, was having more gay characters. I have covered a lot of gay history, and I say it's ironic because we're currently in Pride Month, but not many networks back in the day were very willing to have gay characters. The only first time that happened to at least get it out there was an LA Law that had the first lesbian kiss, but after that they're like, nah, we're not going to actually explore a storyline. But Roseanne did. Roseanne created the storyline for the characters Leon and his eventual husband because Roseanne has family members that are gay in real life, and she wanted their story to be up on there. And that it really speaks to me because I also have a lot of gay friends in my life, and I love to be able to put that in all of my written works. It is such a joy to be able to have such a representation from an outside source, and it's absolutely wonderful. But on that note, I have one last thing to say, that when you look at the timeline for the show of Roseanne, where the storylines accommodated having gay characters, it came at a time where it was vitally important. I mentioned this on a couple of my episodes that have to do with the evolution of portraying gay characters in the media, that you're going to begin some uncomfortable parts, but you also have some moments that really did a good job. Roseanne is one of those moments that exists where it did a good job to portray gay characters. To have the fourth season come out in the beginning of the 90s when it was still an uncertain time to have gay characters, but there was still a presence of gay characters that was starting to grow. Most of them existed in movies at that point, but then you finally had a television show that was willing to take the gamble. And Roseanne didn't care about the gamble. She already put fucking Halloween on television. She's gonna put gay characters on television. And damn it, that didn't stop her. But above everything else that Roseanne has tackled in this show, the best in my eyes is the family trauma. I mentioned earlier about how Dan and Roseanne basically became the parents that they wish they had growing up. With the storylines for Dan and Roseanne and what they went through with their own parents and the trauma they faced, it speaks a lot of volumes than it ever did back in the 90s. Now that we're in a generation that pays attention to upbringings and to not stand for things that should not be validated. And Dan and Roseanne both have very valid feelings about two entirely different upbringings that have their own trauma that gets recognized equally. We'll start with Roseanne's. So, Roseanne's trauma is introduced into season 4 when we're starting to get more of her origin story. And in the episode where she and Jackie break into their family home before it's sold, after they find out about the affair, season 4 is a freaking roller coaster for the origin story of Roseanne. And they both talk about the belt that was used on them by their father. And that changes the way that we've seen the storyline. Before, we thought Roseanne and Jackie loved their father whenever he showed up, but when they removed the father from the storyline, started to feel a little bit more valid in what they were projecting for the plot. It's shoehorned, but at least they made it work to the advantage. If it was going to go, it was going to keep going. And I'm glad they never abandoned this storyline, because it really did change the way that I saw Roseanne. This is where, like, the heart of Roseanne Connor is seen, where we see Roseanne at her most selfish, but in a valid way. In the episode Wait Till Your Father Gets Home from season 5, Roseanne finds out her father is dead. And everyone's planning for the funeral. They're pulling all the stops. Jackie is at the helm of it, and Dan is also willing to help as well, but Roseanne's not interested. For her own reasons. From her shoes, she's had to be okay with her dad coming over. And then her dad just completely disappearing from her life to find out that he's been having an affair for 20 some odd years. And then the family home gets sold. She's been through a lot in that past year that really gets shown in season 5, but I feel that when you put the plot lines together, the weight of that episode really takes it on home, where Roseanne is just done. She's being asked to participate for the funeral, and she's like, I don't want anything to do with him. She's been through enough. But the way it ends is very memorable when she does decide to get her trauma out once and for all and read the note at her father's funeral about how she felt. I will not quote anything from the episode because I feel that is something to experience. It is honestly one of the highlights of Roseanne Barr's career. I'm just saying. Later on, I'm really going to be hurting myself when I have to talk about her controversy, so I got to get my praises out now. But then there's Dan's side. Dan's side was the one that I followed the most throughout the seasons I watched with Roseanne. When Dan's father was introduced at any moment in the show, it was always very rocky. I watched the show out of order, and I always knew that Dan and his dad could just not see eye to eye. They would get to the end of a trip together, but other than that, it was just a reoccurring element. Kind of like what I mentioned earlier with how most of the plot lines around Roseanne dealt with reoccurring problems. This was one of the reoccurring problems. Oh boy, did it boil in the seasons. So I'm just going to go in order for what the hell Dan has been through. So in season 1, when Dan's father is first introduced, Dan is automatically tensed. And when Dan's dad shows up, it feels like sunshine, giggles. As much as Dan and his father had the same thing in common, they unfortunately have another thing in common, which is frustration with each other. They do not know how to emote. They've never really had a time to really lay their emotions down on the table. For this beginning of the storyline in 1987 really speaks a lot of volumes. I have to use that term because it's never easy to have a conversation with a parent that you know means well, but you can't really have a conversation with. And Dan just retreats to the garage every time something goes to hell in a handbasket. And then Roseanne has to do ground control. She's known about this trauma for Dan, but she wants to know what exactly had it that it was set off, because she thought that they had covered everything that could trigger Dan. So she wants to know what's happening. And she doesn't expect that his response is, we hold our fork the same way. Then what's going to happen to me next? Am I going to say things just like him? He just begins falling apart about this fear, this deep-rooted fear that he's going to end up like his dad. It is such a humane thing that we've seen from Dan. We know he's a wholesome guy, but there was a glimpse of the trauma right there. And oh boy. But it doesn't end there with Dan's dad. Eventually, his father Eddie courts and marries and impregnates one of his friends, Roseanne's friend, really. And he watches the whole thing happen. And we're basically seeing what Dan went through in the course of the seasons between 2, 3, and 4. It's looked upon as like the storyline for the character Crystal, but when you really look at it with how Dan has had to witness this, and then you hear Dan's childhood, it has a very strong parallel. It might just be there for the sake of Crystal, but I can't help but see that when I put the trauma pieces together in this show. However, it's the way that the storyline ends for Dan's father that has always stayed with me. So I'm just going to say before I talk about the episode that this here is the reason why I hold the torch for this show up to 6 seasons. And I'm not trying to blow any more smoke up this show's ass, but I don't think it's going to be hard to see why. So, Dan has reached the end of the line with his father. He has watched his mother deteriorate, and from what Dan said, this has been going on for years in his childhood when his father would leave on the business trips and she would just get so depressed. And when the subsequent divorce happened, he blamed all of that on his father, and that's been sprinkled in for 6 seasons. But it wasn't until Lies My Father Told Me came out that changed everything. And so, not only is there an issue that Dan's father hasn't been paying alimony to his mother, don't know why, but whatever, his mother finally has to be taken care of in a way that is out of Dan's hands. Dan had no choice but to institutionalize her because she wasn't making sense of anything, and it just broke Dan's heart to see that it came down to this. So you see where Dan's frustration is coming from, so he is valid in his emotions. However, there's more that's going on than Dan knows about, and the person who finds it out is Roseanne, who did some digging to find out that the medical records show for his mother that this has been going on even before Dan was born. It is the heaviest mic drop on the show to find out that all of this time, his mother has been going through severe issues. But then you look at Dan's father and realize that he knew about this before Dan was born. And he did not say anything bad at all about his mother, Audrey. As Roseanne put it, it was the only way for Dan to see his mother as a hero than to have to be introduced to the mental health problems, and then he wouldn't have had the same image that he's had of her for years. And as much as Dan is resisting the truth that's being told to him, it's starting to sink in even more. The way it's resolved, there's no way to comfort some mic drop like that. There isn't. Dan sits at the table and then he says the 4 most heartbreaking words, "I can't take this." And Roseanne just says, "It's okay. I'll take it with you." That's why I hold the torch for the show. No matter what I hear of the controversy, this is the episode that saves the show for me. I don't have the best of luck with seasons 7, 8, 9, and whatever the hell the Connors is, but this is what people should know about Roseanne is this one episode. This just sums up everything about the show. Dan and Roseanne against the world, doing everything they can. A couple that's supporting each other in the worst of times. So, now that I got that out of the way, now it's time to go on to the heavier part of the show. Okay, so there's another part of this episode that I would never forgive myself if I didn't talk about it. and it's the infamous Jackie episode. So we're going to switch gears here and talk about Aunt Jackie, because I feel like it's criminal how much Laurie Metcalf is not recognized for her early works in Roseanne. As much as I love this woman, she's been in so many things. She was fucking Andy's mom from Toy Story. The woman's got a great filmography. But it's this moment on Roseanne that the OGs will know that this is prime Laurie Metcalf. There's a two-parter episode in Roseanne that tackles domestic abuse. And I'm going to go ahead and preface that because once I get into the episode, I might not give a trigger warning. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you there's going to be a time code to skip ahead of this stuff. Because, it's going to be a rough one, guys. But, thank you for bearing with me. In the episode, Jackie is getting pretty irritable. She is spending less time with the family because she's so infatuated with Fisher. Fisher's been the guy for season 5. Jackie's always had a guy, but it looks like maybe she found the one. But like I said, she's spending less time with her family. There are some flags going off in Jackie's relationship. And it's not until Jackie gets too upset at Roseanne, blows up, and, sometimes Roseanne deserves to be blown up at, but Jackie's the bigger person and wants to make it up. And so Roseanne milks it and says, let's do all these things in true Roseanne fashion, and she is caught by Darlene, and Darlene says the heartbreaking words, "Did Aunt Jackie have an accident? There are bruises on her back." And then everything is Oh, sorry. It's a tough one to talk about, having to work through it. Roseanne finds out the truth that Fisher did this to Jackie. And it is heartbreaking how Jackie basically excuses Fisher's behavior. No one should ever have to interpret physical violence as a way of punishment that, he did this to me and he said, you bring this out of me. No. And Jackie was a cop. Jackie's heard a sentence like this before, and unfortunately she's too in love with Fisher to realize that this is not love. And she puts everything on herself. Watching this episode with an adult perspective really changed. As many of you know, I have shared my story about when I went through my domestic abusive relationship, and even though I was not physically abused like Jackie was, this episode hit harder because that was the episode that showed me what abuse was. And then I ended up saying the same things Jackie said. It truly felt like a way of looking back at my past and realizing that I broke my own promise as a child. But just like Jackie, it wasn't my fault. And it's no one's fault for being abused, ever. But it's awful that monologues like Jackie's exist. But the most shocking part of the episode was after the confession, when Dan walks in and finds out what happens. We all know that Dan does not think the most of Jackie, but we know that he does love her enough that jail time is something he is totally okay with negotiating. That episode won an Emmy for Laurie Metcalf. But it's also the episode that spoke on a silent plea for stories like Jackie. A lot of the stories within Roseanne do feel like it is speaking for the people that have gone through stuff like Becky, Roseanne, Dan, Jackie. Anybody that has suffered a trauma or abuse. Everyone's stories feel heard. And the fact that this is the show that was closest to the blue-collar dreams and nightmares. But it is such a great episode. but it is one of the hardest ones to have to look at, in my opinion. But with all of the praises made towards the show now, I think it's about time to talk about the downfall of the show. Now, a lot of people have said that the true downfall of the show happened in season 9, and I 100% wholeheartedly agree with that. But I think season 7 is where we should take a look at. In season 7, there's stuff going on, but it's not emotionally charged. I've never really felt that season 7 had the same weight as the other seasons, and season 7 is that pinnacle. The things that season 7 dealt with was Jackie adjusting to a married life, and Roseanne got pregnant with a child that eventually got retconned in the revival, and Darlene and David broke up. Again. When you follow the coattails of the past seasons that have dealt with family abuse, that have dealt with narcissistic abuse, that have dealt with family trauma, sexuality, there was nothing after that. I didn't see a single episode in season 7 where I felt the same wave of emotions as I did in the previous seasons. It still had the comedy, but that was it. I think Roseanne is a pretty multi-layered show where it left room to have tragedy, and there wasn't much. Now, personally, I think this show should have ended at season 8. It would have been morbid to go off on, but that was technically where the show actually pinpointed the end at. Now, I'm going to explain that. So, near the end of season 8, Dan has a heart attack. I mean, it was about to happen with his health. We had to have some kind of health scare. That was the first time I think we had something serious happen since season 6. And then Dan doesn't really want to have to do anything with his health regime. There's a big fight. And they ended the season 8 right there. Now, personally, I feel like they should have ended it after the heart attack. Now, that would have been a hell of a thing to have to kill off one of America's favorite sitcom patriarchs. But I feel it would have been okay if we didn't see a future, but we got to know the plans. I could have very well seen a beautiful eulogy given by everyone at Dan's funeral. I could have seen some resolve between the Connor siblings. There could have been a moment to have more emotional weight, because I feel that Roseanne should have ended emotionally in this limelight than what they did in season 9. Because, oh boy, season 9, here we go. The entire 9th season just feels like a slap in the face, and the storylines just hurt my eyes. It kind of felt like they were just throwing things at the wall and just seeing if it would stick, and that is kind of one of the TV terms they have when it comes to poor writing. I can't believe everyone said yes to this season. I am still shocked. There were plot lines around Darlene's baby being the spawn of Satan just because they wanted to do like a Rosemary's Baby joke. Okay, whatever. Then there were terrorists on a train and Roseanne took care of them like Rambo, and I'm like, oh god, it hurts to have to reiterate these storylines. And then Dan had an affair, and then, oh god, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse, and it's all because of the storyline of winning the lottery. But for me, the moment that I officially closed my book on Roseanne was near the end of season 9, when Dan's mom comes back. Yeah, you remember Dan's mom that he fought for? There was a whole emotional weight to it in season 6. So now she's back and she's trying to kill Dan. I felt so insulted by that episode. I stood by that storyline with Dan's family, and for them to just make fun of mental health like that, I feel that whoever wrote that episode should be deeply ashamed. And I also feel like it is the waste of the talented Debbie Reynolds for having to take that shot. Oh my god. That was where I ended things in the show. That's why I won't even watch The Connors, to be honest. I know that times have changed, but when you hit a point with a show that you can't go back, like, that was my point. But as it turns out, it was all a dream because Dan actually died of a heart attack at the wedding. So everything we saw, Roseanne being a savior in a train, that was a dream. Darlene's baby being the spawn of Satan, that was also a dream. Dan having an affair, also a dream. Them winning the lottery, that was the entire thing. Was what would their lives look like if they won the lottery? So it was just one giant book idea. So basically, the thing I said earlier does check out. I just wish that this wasn't what it was. I would have loved to have seen something more heartfelt than what the fuck that was. But season 9 really wasn't the downfall of Roseanne. Some of that had to do with, well, Roseanne herself. So I can't ignore that I do need to give the time to talk about why there is a downfall to Roseanne, and that is partially because of Roseanne herself. Now, I have to preface to say that I did find out that there are some mental health issues going on with Roseanne that is not determined yet. So I'm going to be a little gingerly with the way that I address these controversies because there's so much more that needs to be investigated. Right now, people are pointing fingers without evidence, and I don't do that on this show. So, the ones that I know of on top of my head, I'm just going to kind of do a bonus round. There was the plastic surgery that she got that altered the character, and that really hurt the show. And then there was the infamous Star-Spangled Banner that she did at a baseball game, and I don't think I have to go into more detail about that. Nope, people want to forget it, and so do I. Roseanne also had her antics with her then husband, Tom Arnold, who was a credit in many of the episodes between season 1, 2, 3, and I think a little bit of 4. And, their antics definitely fed into the show. It fed into tabloids of the news. It was nasty. So unfortunately, even though Roseanne had her own issues going on, the thing she did was not good. That did not give the show a good reputation. I feel like there was a double time to have to work. The fact that the most emotional moments still shine despite the timeline of the controversies does really attest how much she did work despite these controversies. But then 2018 came along. I don't like having to talk about this, but I feel like I wouldn't be doing a good service to my show if I didn't mention the tweet. So, Roseanne finally got her show back, and the new revival was going to completely expunge everything that happened in season 9. It has been so long since I have talked about this story that I didn't even remember the name of the woman that Roseanne had insulted. It was about Obama aide Valerie Jarrett, and I do not want to quote the tweet. I don't think I need to do that. But that one tweet just ruined 30 years of work. Roseanne has always been a wildfire. I mentioned all the stuff that she did with the antics she had with her husbands, the stuff she did with the Star-Spangled Banner. It's just, she didn't know how to freaking stop. I know that this is something that attributes to mental health, but as much as there should be help given to her, if this is the case, then mental health can't be an excuse for her actions there. It's like a double-edged sword on a double-edged sword. And it's just tricky and sticky. And I wish she didn't do that because I would have loved to have seen more of her in the revival. But no one wants anything to do with her. Anytime I look at the first 6 seasons of Roseanne, I also see that these are people that don't talk to Roseanne anymore. I'm watching this moment in time that's just going to have to exist as a moment in time because there's no redeeming that. I'd like to be proven wrong. I'd like to think that maybe in the future there could be some kind of reparation that Roseanne can get back the friendship she had with the cast for over 30 years. But only time will tell. But with that said, I want to end things on a better note. And that is some of the stories on the set of Roseanne. So I saw this at a very young age, and I have to admit that The story I'm about to tell you is one of the hugest beacons that I have for why I have a strong torch for the show is the story from Lacey Goranson and Michael Fishman when they talked about what it was like being the Connor children on the decade of the 80s and the 90s. And Lacey Goranson's story that she shared is my favorite. So around the time that season 4 was about to be filmed, she had asked the producers if she could cut her hair. And they're like, Lacey, 17-year-old girls from Lanford, Illinois don't have short hair. And she goes, well, that's odd because I am a 17-year-old girl from Lanford, Illinois. And they're like, okay, well, you still can't cut your hair. Like, either way, the producers were not having it. And this really made Lacey upset and felt very controlled. And then Roseanne walks up and sees Lacey's upset, and she goes, Lacey, what's wrong? Lacey even said the exact same accent I did, because you kind of can't not do that. But anyway, she explains to Roseanne, they won't let me cut my hair. And Roseanne goes, oh, really? And so she takes a pair of scissors, turns Lacey around, and cuts the hair at the base of her head. Roseanne's holding Lacey's hair in one, scissors in the other, and she goes, there! What are they going to do about it? And so, Lacey walks by the producers with her newly cut hair. The producers are like, we had this conversation, and she's like, well, you're going to have to talk to Roseanne about that. Still my favorite story. But this next one, I love how this lives in my head rent-free. So, in the early years of Roseanne, a then unknown George Clooney signed on for a handful of episodes. And honestly, if you're not a big fan of Roseanne, I highly encourage you to watch George Clooney on Roseanne because it feels like a fever dream that I just enjoy. And George Clooney had a picture of himself on the set. And in this picture, George Clooney was showing all of his Clooney. And the only person that knew about it was John Goodman, and the photo would be hid in the set. And then one day the photo just disappeared from the set. Everyone looked for it. I like to imagine how that conversation went, like, hey, so there's an item, it's not good, but it's also a really good photo, but it's bad that it's out there, so if we could keep an eye out for it. And no one could find it. And at first it was like, are you sure you're just lying, George? But John is like, nope, I saw it. It's real. Oh my gosh. I love that they never found the photo, but I've also never gotten an update if they found that photo. Like, there's an update about a naked picture of Ryan Reynolds, but we never got the update about the naked George Clooney from the set of Roseanne. I would have loved to have seen it. I'm pretty sure John Goodman has it. I mean, if he had to say it, I'm pretty sure he has it. But then there's my last story, and this is the best way to end the episode. At the very end of season 1, near the end of season 1, I should say, there was a behind-the-scenes featurette showed for a surprise guest that showed up during one of the filming segments of Roseanne. And that was Bruce Willis. He just walked into the bedroom set and got in bed with Roseanne, and they're laughing and hugging, and she is just thrilled that someone from another show decided to just stop by. And then John Goodman walks up and he goes, hang on, I'll get my checkbook! And it's hilarious. And Bruce Willis, damn, it was so cool getting to see that. And he goes, I thought I'd just stop by, and then he just leaves. And seeing the look on Roseanne's face where she is absolutely happy. So happy in her life. And that moment gets to be shared with us. And I'm glad that I get to share that with you. And I hope that you get to think about that during the day whenever you need to laugh. So that's it. This was a roller coaster of an episode. It's been a while since I tackled the TV show. But I think it's safe to say I'm going to take a break from some TV shows to talk about for a while. I think I'm just going to stick to watching them. Well, Before I go into finding out what the next episode on the Screen Queen is going to be, I have a overdue shout out that I have to do. There are two musicians that I've gotten acquainted with recently, and I wanted to give my show as an advertisement spot to give them a highlight for their musical endeavors. So the first one is an artist named Reeve Stimpson. He had reached out to me a couple weeks ago and told me he enjoyed one of the articles I wrote about 80s music and sent me a free sticker. And I was like, you know what this means? You send me a free sticker, I'm gonna have to say thank you and give you a shout out. And so I really gotta say, if you're looking for 80s music and a modern twist, you gotta check out Reeve. You really won't be sorry. I'm so sorry that joke turned out so much better in my head and it didn't. But anyway, we're moving on. The second artist is the best for last. I got to meet Eddie Cross at open mic night, and I was introduced to his music at a concert that was going on the next day, and it's some of the best Christian rock music that I've heard in quite some time. And I got the chance to speak to him. He is so supporting and so wholesome. I do have their information in the description box so you can check them out. You won't be sorry. And that concludes your Sammy shout out for the evening. I want to get in a habit of doing more of these to use my show to give a huge sound off to some others that are also working as equally as hard as I am in the creative department. So, now is the time to find out what the next episode is going to be on the Screen Queen, and then I get to take a much needed break. So here we go. So we have a lot of suggestions in the suggestion box, so let's find out together now, shall we? Here we go. Okay, I think that's mixed up enough. Pull from the bottom. Please don't be a television show. Please don't be a television show. Please don't be a television show. Please don't. Yes! I am so sorry if I blew your speakers out, but you have no idea how happy I am to be holding a summer favorite in my hands. On to the next episode for the Screen Queen is going to be Point Break. I'm so fucking excited. I mean, you guys can obviously tell if your ears are still intact. Wow. Alrighty. Well, if you want to catch up with me in between uploads, you can find me on my Instagram at the Queen of the Screen. If you also want to share with me your favorite story about Roseanne or anything else you'd like to talk about Roseanne, I'm all ears over there. And if you're looking to listen to the Screen Queen on another platform, I am now available on YouTube. I'm getting the word out about that so people can find an easier time listening to the Media Queen on the East Coast. And if you're interested in the very weird, chaotic, dysfunctional story that I wrote called Inglorious Inc., it's available on Amazon, but you can find that bad boy in the description box. Alrighty. You all take care now. Stay amazing. This is your Screen Queen, signing off. Bye-bye!